Hey folks, Dan Lapel for New Focus Recordings, joined by composer Eren Gumrukcuoglu, who has a really cool album coming out on October 14th, week and a half from now, Pareidolia. Hey Aaron, how you doing?
Hi, good. How are you?
Good, good. Thanks for making time to chat about this. Uh, Really cool
Yeah, no
collection
problem.
of electronic music, electroacoustic stuff, a couple acoustic pieces alone. I guess it's only one, isn't it? Or no, it's two. Two string quartets, right?
Yeah, two string quartets
Yeah.
without electronics. The rest are all with electronics, I
But
guess.
right, right, right.
Yeah, you know.
Uh, there's a real pretty wide scope. I feel like, even though there's no orchestral music on this
Yeah,
record, but the larger ensemble pieces have a a large sort of sonic ambition, and there's an awful lot of color, and it's a very compelling listen.
yeah. I like those large gestures that grandiose feelings,
Yeah, that's
things like
awesome.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So we were just before I hit record, we were chatting for a second about your background in improvisation as a guitarist. We see the guitar right behind you, uh,
Oh yeah.
but also
Yeah.
some very
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I've been trained as a jazz guitarist at first. I was in DC at Duke Ellington School of Arts in high school. Then I went to Berkeley, studied jazz composition
Yeah,
and film scoring. After that, I went to Hollywood, but there I continued playing as a studio, session guitarist. So I've been improvising all my life, and that's like one of the major modes of composition for me. I improvise my stuff. I write things down and then I record myself. I listen to it. I sift through stuff that some goes to trash, some goes to other pieces, and then some end up on paper. And the same goes for electronics. I create these generative systems on the computer, either with Max or Reactor, and then I basically create some elaborate system, and I feed it the kind of sound files that I want it to sound like. I hit record. I go run some errands, come back, listen to maybe 2, 3 hours of stuff that has been accumulated on the computer, and I sift through that and I find the most, usable parts that I'm looking for the aesthetic of the piece, and I kind of make a montage. And I also treat computers sometimes as my improvisation buddy,
right.
where I will kind of get inspired by what the computer does and kind of keep that dialogue between the live instruments and electronics as if there's an interplay. So as if the electronics is it has agency of a performer.
Yeah,
That's the
that's
idea.
that's really interesting. So the in the electronics alone pieces, the the sort of selection of the initial parameters of how you're designing the I guess maybe not right to call it a patch, but how you sort of setting up the computer to improvise within, I guess, a certain range of parameters, right?
Yes.
Uh,
So what happened, for example, with the first and the last track is first the electronics created this granulated version of recordings that I already had. And then I go and hook up a MIDI controller and then I improvise over the thing with like tape tricks and reverse and pitch shifting and things
of
like
course.
that. And a lot of the gestural things that happen in terms of filter combs and things like that, I actually am improvising. And if I get a nice performance, that's the piece.
Yeah, great.
you know. So it's
Awesome.
kind of layers of improvisation. At the end, the source material gets so obscured that you don't even remember where you started.
Right. Well, that
But it,
I,
yeah,
I had that impression very strongly about the last piece, particularly. Uh,
the last piece and the first piece and the title track, Pareidolia, are all coming from one single source, which is the Duke University Music Department elevator. I recorded that elevator.
no kidding.
And so we had the rehearsal with Jack Quartet. I had the recordings, and then I have the actual recording of Pareidolia. And then I created this weird tape track called Pandemonium from all of those gathered recordings, some of the unused stuff too. So that's why the performers are listed on that track, even though it's a fixed media track. And the last is only the elevator, just the elevator recording that I, messed around with a little bit with some granular sampling and tape things, tape manipulation.
Was
The last track.
Recorded inside the elevator or outside the elevator shaft? Like
going inside the elevator, going upstairs, getting out, and then you hear the water fountain actually in the hallway.
oh, cool.
All of that. It's kind of a 52-second recording
Nice.
that inspired those. The whole spawned 3 pieces out of that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That elevator really gave you bang for.
Yeah.
Have you told the Duke University physical plant folks the sort of fruitful nature of their? I mean, I feel like
no,
someone
but
should
the music
know.
department knows. They've been seeing me walking around.
Oh right, yeah. I wonder if there's going to be any royalty expectation.
No, no. I recorded a bunch of other stuff too. There's also my washing machine in Pareidolia.
That's cool. I actually,
washing machine.
I mean, all of those sort of appliance sounds are often really fascinating. They're like really rich in overtone and
yeah. So why this album is called Pareidolia is because of that. Because I have had this auditory pareidolia thing since I was a kid. A lot of us experienced this when we're little, our parents, dry our hair, and there's this, pitch, and it changes with, the direction, and you might try to match it in your, head, or hum together, create harmonies with that. But also when there's really, quiet parts of the night and there's HVAC, like faint fan noises, that triggered this thing called musical ear syndrome that I had, kind of an auditory pareidolia. Pareidolia is the thing where you look at the clouds and you say, oh, there's a lamb, there's an alligator, there's a dinosaur, that kind of thing.
Right,
when your brain is trying to make sense of things where there are no patterns, but your brain is kind of connecting dots that are not there to create patterns, so it makes sense. So a lot of times I will hear, the HVAC fan and a female choir with elaborate harmonies and everything. I will hear that stuff. And then I thought, actually, composition is kind of like that. You hear stuff in your head, but you don't really hear it, do you? So until you kind of put it out, it's just kind of some imaginary things that are happening. So this whole idea of pattern recognition and kind of your brain creating errors in pattern recognition drew me to this concept of pareidolia, and that's where it all came from. Basically, the machine noises that I experience, throughout the day in our daily lives, and how they can become musical, and how I kind of started inspiring me to write more and more, with kind of making recordings of those things and then manipulating them and then trying to extract. Sometimes I put it in, spectral analysis. Sometimes I just use my ear. Sometimes I just mess around with it with electronics and create its own thing.
Yeah, that's cool. Actually, it sort of seems like it speaks to the producer end of that process too. You're listening to a sort of collection of material, but then you're trying to hear these shapes within it, and then sort of Teo Macero style, like editing out the best stuff.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. Very similar. Yes.
That's cool. Well, let's actually pivot a little bit to some of the specific spots on the album, just to give people a taste. On the title track itself, Pareidolia, there's this cool moment after the saxophone improvisation. So just to clarify also, the saxophonist is the one instrumentalist in the ensemble who's actually playing improvised material, like their own material, right?
For about 1 minute. So Pareidolia is in 7 sections.
Yeah.
And so the sixth section, right before the end, that's where the saxophone is improvising over the electronics.
Yeah.
And the prompt was basically use the vocabulary in the whole piece, similar vocabulary. And so after you learn the piece, then you can improvise, and then also listen to the electronics part and treat it like as if it's a person. So how would you trade? And this is a good friend of mine back from Berkeley. He's a classically trained clarinetist, but he switched to jazz saxophone while at Berkeley. So he's, equally skilled in both genres. So I thought, okay, he can improvise and he can also read and he can also do all these, extended techniques and everything. So that really worked out well. So
That's great.
after that, we get into the seventh section, which we're going to hear, which brings out all the elements from the whole piece, basically, but more the thematic material from the first section, kind of a conclusion.
Cool. So great. Well, let's check out this sort of climactic moment from the title track, Pareidolia. Very cool. So we were listening to the Jack Quartet, Konrad Tao on keyboards, Zulfigar Bagirov on clarinet and tenor saxophone, and Tom Monks on percussion. Cool. Well, maybe as a contrast, let's check out the one of the two acoustic works on the record, string quartets.
Both good, yeah.
Played by the Mivos Quartet. I just saw Olivia last night, actually. Yeah. So I found there to be like a sort of similar way of material evolving in the string quartets to how some of your electronic music seems to develop. Is that am I sort of misperceiving it? It's like this sort of I don't know, it's like a percolation or something. This fragmentary thing, and then from the fragmentary materials we hear longer lines, but also the fragmentation
I think
allows for this evolution, sort of.
I think, well, I guess that's kind of a side effect of my aesthetic sensibilities. It wasn't really, I mean, the methods are completely different the way I compose these.
Yeah.
But the idea for this piece was, I'm really interested in Turkish folk music and the timbres of the Turkish folk instruments, and the microtonal makams and all those things.
Of course.
And I tried to imagine the string quartet as if it's a kind of a, not even Turkish, but Turkic, like from Western China till Bulgaria, that whole area where you have these steppes where, the nomads on the, the yurts and all that stuff. And the culture, the musical culture kind of permeates through that whole area. And when you come to Turkey, the modern Turkey, it's kind of, it kind of fuses with Greek, Byzantine, and all those antiquity, all the other different kind of cultural influences in the area. And the instrumental timbres are very interesting to me. So I tried to imagine the string quartet as what if it's a Turkic stringed instrument? And, kind of this buzzing harsh and kind of twangy sound.
Mm.
So what I have done is I created a synthesizer patch that I liked. Again, I improvised something for about a minute or two, and then I put it through this software that Earcom has, Orchids, and created some timbral orchestral solutions and see how that sounded. And then from there, that created my sketches for the string quartet. And I just started writing, from left to right. Yeah, so this was really abstract in that sense, where I'm more thinking about just the imaginary instrument and kind of treating the string quartet as a whole rather than four separate instruments. And I guess what happened is that I tend to write these complicated rhythms. I don't know why. I always tell myself to write something simpler the next time, but it always kind of gets into this convoluted rhythms, and I can't help it. But I guess maybe that's why it's kind of similar to the electronics tracks, because of those kind of little fragments that are complicated, but then when they come together, they kind of create this linear thread that kind of makes sense on the long run.
Yeah,
you know.
I think. Well, that's exactly sort of what I'm hearing. Or almost like a cantus firmus emerges somehow from all this sort of.
Yeah, so what I was thinking is that, just the foreground and background elements, and there's no such thing basically. There's no hierarchy of foreground, middle ground, background. It's all together.
Yeah,
That's the whole idea. Yeah.
cool. Well, let's listen to a bit of the opening of
All right.
the first quartet on the record, Baskir. Am I saying that right?
Bozkır. It means
Baskir.
steps, basically.
Oh,
Literally
it actually
means
means
steps. Steps as in Steppes, like in the kind of
right,
the barren land where they
right,
run
like
their
in the
horses.
stands, or
Yeah.
right, yeah, yeah, very cool. Okay,
Yeah.
here it is. Great. Well, so another sort of contrasting piece sonically on the record is Lattice Scattering, flute piano and fixed media.
Yeah.
Uh, and well, why don't you sort of lead us into that one a little bit?
Okay, so this one I think shows the jazzier side of my writing, and also the electronics are a little bit different. This time the electronics are actually composed. So on the score I have the pitches and I don't have the rhythms, but so it's kind of like there are two live instruments, but there are about six electronic instruments which are not played live. So it's kind of an ensemble of eight,
And
and everything is kind of written down. Everything is written down. There's no, but I'm trying to kind of again convey this elasticity of jazz interplay.
mm,
One of my good friends, Nicholas Georges, called it like techno jazz
uh-huh.
one time. So, and the idea for this came from my brother, who's a particle physicist. One of the concepts that I learned was lattice scattering, which is usually they do this when they're testing new material for industrial applications or designs. When you look closely, the atoms are kind of laid out in a lattice pattern, and they test it, how it would react to different conditions. And sometimes when you hit it with electrons in just the right way, the lattice will vibrate in a way, and it will actually create sound. which they call phonons, and that was very fascinating to me. And I kind of, as my primitive musician brain, I tried to imagine what that would be like in a musical piece. So I tried to have these sparkly, crystally kind of sounds.
Yeah.
And this was a piece that I wrote for a festival in Italy. So I kind of have to think quick. I had a month to write it.
Okay.
So it's for piano, flute, and electronics. So I didn't have time to record hours and hours of electronics material and sift through it and do my general, thing with as the, so I had to kind of write the electronics part, literally just write it down. And so this has that kind of improvisatory quality as well, but it's all written. And so the lattice scattering title kind of reflects the timbral, the sonic environment that the piece is trying to convey.
Cool. I'm curious about, maybe you could send me the score to this sometime just to take a look, but I'm curious about how the fixed media actually looks on the page. Are you someone who...
It's one staff, and I have pitches without rhythm and without stems, just dots. Dots. So and they line up with everything, but I don't have the rhythms. And I was actually told maybe if I have the rhythm, it would make more sense for the performance. But there's a click track, so they.
Right, I was about to say, if there's a click, then you can learn the click and learn the tape, and put this time, at this moment, this note lands on beat 3 or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's cool. I mean, there's such an interesting range of how fixed media ends up looking on the page. Sort of, I've seen, basically just graphic stuff, and if there isn't a click and it's just graphic, then it really ends up being like pretty approximate, I think.
Yeah, I've done different things. And another piece that I don't have on this album because I don't have a recording of it yet, but I mean, I have some recordings, but it's not studio quality. I have another piece called Plasticity where I just put a spectrogram.
Right. Yeah.
Because again, that part wasn't really like an ensemble situation. It was more, an extension of the sonic timbre of the ensemble. In this case, like I said, there are actually 6 players that are imaginary in there. So they all have to really rhythmically line up.
Yeah. But
everything has to line up. This is that only piece in the album where electronics really are lining up with the live instruments and getting these actual orchestrations.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, it might be. I mean, it sounds like the kind of piece that if you did end up writing out the rhythms sort of precisely, you might be able to do it without the click track.
Maybe, yeah, you could.
I'm sure the click always makes it. It makes it.
It just makes it easier.
Yeah,
and it's short enough so it doesn't annoy anybody.
My personal feeling as a player is that even though it takes more time to learn a fixed media part without any kind of click reference, once I've done that, it feels a little bit more like I'm playing chamber music
more organic. Yeah.
It feels like I'm actually really in dialogue with the electronics, and because every day you play it and every space you play it in is a little different, it lends a sort of dynamic feeling to the piece, which I think is cool.
Yeah.
Great. Well, let's listen to the opening of this one, and we've got Ensemble Suono Giallo, which is Andrea Biagini on flute, and Simone Gnocchi on piano. And this is Lattice Scattering, flute, piano, and electronics. Great. That was cool to get sort of a snapshot of three different kinds of things you're doing on this record. One piece I did want to mention, just because it's sort of so striking, is Ordinary Things,
Yeah.
which features excerpts of speeches given by the Turkish authoritarian leader Erdogan. Uh,
Yeah.
Sort of, it's interesting is that the piece exists both in this sort of genre of I don't know how what you would call it, sort of shadowed speech type music,
Mhm.
everything from like
Mhm.
different trains to any other number of pieces. But I think because of who it is, and I guess because of who you are, growing up in Turkey, and it has this, and because we're living through this ridiculous, insane sort of authoritarian populist moment, it has
Yeah.
this additional power to it.
Yeah. Well, the title comes from um, it's something that he had said about there was an explosion in a mine, and usually when some kind of tragedy like that happens and hundreds of people die, um, the reaction from the government tended to be in his reign. um, these things happen. These things happen. It's ordinary things.
Right,
Move along. Nothing to see here.
right, yeah,
Kind of. So a lot of stuff happens, and there's never any kind of nobody takes
no,
responsibility.
no
It's just
accountability.
ordinary things. Of course,
Yeah,
people
right,
die. They signed up. It's a dangerous job. So what?
yeah,
And a lot of these speeches are kind of like that. And what I have to kind of try to do in the piece was just kind of flip the words around, either by cutting things in a different order, or just kind of creating a musical background to the speech where it's actually either contrasting or amplifying the meaning in a ridiculous manner.
yeah,
And it's very harsh, really dissonant, and the orchestration it's the Histoire du Soldat, the
yeah, of course,
Stravinsky
yeah, yeah,
septet.
yeah,
And it's the soprano and the bass of each instrument family,
right,
basically.
right,
And electronics, which the electronics not only has Erdogan's speech, but also some instrumental elements in there as well. Um, and yeah, so this was composed for the Deviant Septet in 2015 and 16. And actually, after I completed this, they also asked me to write one for Donald Trump
yeah,
before he was elected, and I have done that as well. But this has a really good recording, and it has some of my most kind of intricate instrumental writing, I would say, in it, where I was kind of trying to show off a little bit as well, maybe.
yeah. No, it's
And
great.
so basically, yeah, and this was one of the first pieces where I was using a lot of the earcom software to kind of derive some sketches from previously made recordings.
Yeah,
So yeah, it ended up being really it it received a good kind of people liked it.
yeah,
But so I just had to get it out of my system. So I'm
yeah, yeah.
glad I've done that.
No,
So I
it's
don't have to
it's
deal with it.
very very effective, and to me that strikes me as a challenging uh sort of expressive world to stay in, where you're the preserving that sort of mocking sardonic tone and getting it just right. And I think you really did. And it
Thank you.
you know but it preserves this ominous sense throughout. It never tips over to just sheer
Yes, you
humor.
can you can tell that this is not completely serious, but at the same time, the whole thing has a sinister vibe.
Yes, right. That's
Yeah.
that's sort of what I'm getting. I wasn't articulating it that well, but that
Mm.
to me seems to be a delicate balance that I thought you struck really well. Let's.
Thank you.
We were gonna just do three, but let's just listen to a minute or so of this also to give the
Alright.
good folks a taste. So this is Ordinary Things, and we're listening to the Deviant Septet.
Çok ama çok iyi. Aşağı tutun. Vur.
Mezarlık soyguncusu.
Hepsi var. Çok. Ne yapacağım? Nasıl yapacağım?
Bunun adı gürültü kürleri.
Affedersin, Ermeni diyelim. Ya böyle bir şey.
Ama onlar ateist. Onlar terörist. Bunların meselesi.
Great. Thanks so much, Eren, for taking the time. It's great to chat.
Thank you.
And let me just shout out quickly some credits on this. You recorded 3 of the tracks, 1, 3, and 7. Also, we've got Rick Nelson on tracks 2, 4, and 6, and David Giace. Am I saying that right?
Giacche.
Giace. You mixed it. Morat Kolak mastered the record, and he's been doing a lot of great work mastering a handful of records that I'm seeing. Cover design is Bora Tekoglu.
Yes.
Okay, cool. It's FCR343, comes out on the 14th, and it's really exciting. It's great to sort of get to know your music through this process.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, and everybody check this out when it lands. It's fascinating music. All right, take care. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care. Thanks. Bye-bye.